Hey everybody, welcome to the very first episode of Brilliant But Lazy. I'm Alan.
And I'm Josh, and it is the first episode of Brilliant But Lazy. We went through several possible names for this. Many of them were taken.
Yes.
Other ones we questioned whether our ideologies matched up with them, but we landed on this one.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, go to Otto Octavius for
That's right.
for inspiration. So
why are we doing this?
Why are we doing this? That is a very good question, and I've been asking myself that all day.
Uh-huh.
So for the last year or so, Josh and I have been the Marvel correspondents for Victims and Villains, a website that promotes mental health and suicide prevention through pop culture. So this is an offshoot of what we've been doing there, because we were getting together practically every month to talk about the latest Marvel thing, whether it was a Disney Plus show or movie. We were getting together every month, and we're like, well, we should do this more often. So we're here to talk about not only Marvel stuff, but probably some other pop culture stuff as it comes along in the pipeline. But
Yeah. As you can see from our backgrounds, we are well versed in lots of nerd stuff. From your background, I can see everything from The Mask to Mask of Zorro to The Fierce Are Fading. If you haven't checked out that, it's an excellent comic. Yeah, but we've got plenty of fandoms that me and you both appreciate, and instead of having a DC correspondent and a Star Wars correspondent and a Harry Potter correspondent, we just figured we'd come out with a all nerd fandom friendly show, and we'll tackle things as they come about.
Yeah. So right off the gate, I think, do we want to get into our Phase 4 stuff first, or do we want to do our...
Yeah, sure. We're gonna do two major things in this episode.
Yeah.
We wanted to still, give nods to our Marvel stuff. We've talked about most of these already, and we kind of wanted to rank Phase 4, but then to give, a nod to just other properties outside of Marvel. Later, we're going to do our top 10 comic book movies of all time. That's not necessarily just MCU films.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's do Phase 4 first, since it just ended up.
Well, because I believe at the end of our holiday special episode, we talked about ranking of the Phase 4 stuff. So
yeah,
let's get into that first. Let me close this out. All right.
Now, we did have a caveat here, though. We're only ranking 15 films and shows. We are not including I Am Groot, Werewolf by Night, or the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special.
Yes.
Just because those were specials. Even though the holiday special definitely, leads into Phase 5, or might have things that Phase 5 references.
The holiday special for Guardians would have made my list if 15 didn't work on the graphic as well as it did.
Yeah, there you go.
So,
yeah.
Spoiler
alert! I think Kevin Bacon is the next Thanos in the MCU. That's what I was referring to for the holiday special leading into Phase 5. Yeah. So get ready for that, folks.
The way that Kevin Bacon and Groot just go at each other in the special is just insane. All right, okay. So we're going to get into our ranking of Marvel Phase 4, and this is including, like we said, all the films and TV shows for Disney Plus. So Josh, let's start with your number 15.
Oh, we're starting from the bottom. Okay.
Oh, yeah. You got to work your way up to the top.
I hear that. Okay. The bottom was easy for me, and I feel like Seth, my buddy from Nerf Herders Assemble, would back me up on this. Thor Love and Thunder was bottom of the barrel. And it probably doesn't help that it came out this year, so the wound is still fresh. But when I really took a look at all of these and tried to we didn't do like a watch over the last week. I just looked at these properties and remembered the things that I appreciated about them, and remembered the things that were highlights for me. And that one still fell to the bottom of the barrel. I did not care for Thor: Love and Thunder. but I'm sure I was harsher on it than you were. Because what's your number 15?
Thor: Love and Thunder.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
and I like Thor:
Okay.
Love and Thunder a bit when I saw it in theaters, but it just I what I did for my ranking was I wrote everything down, and then I was like, okay, I wanted to go through my letterbox and just see what I had everything ranked as, and then go off of that.
Sure.
But
Sure.
letterbox wasn't working for me the way I wanted it to, so I just did it myself. It's like, okay, gonna give this 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars. Uh, I ended up giving Thor: Love and Thunder 2 stars, and I was like, Thor Ragnarok was such a high point for the MCU in general, and
Mm-hmm.
then Thor: Love and Thunder it doesn't meet that, and it missed all my expectations. Like I love Natalie Portman's Jane Foster Thor, but there's just so much about it that just fell flat for me compared to other things in the MCU.
Yeah, well, I mean, I tried to look at these as what resonates with me the most, what solidified the Phase 4 the most, which ones would I want to go back and rewatch the
Mm-hmm.
most, and so all those things factored in. But wow, okay, so it looks like we're on par with each other so far. Sounds good.
So far, yes, it's not going to stay that way
Yeah.
for long.
Okay.
So, all
Well,
right,
do you want to do your 14 first?
yeah, my 14 is Black Widow.
Mm-hmm.
The film that started off Phase 4 eventually. I just haven't had any like rewatchability played a part in a lot of what I was when I was looking at this stuff, and there's not much. The only thing that's there for me to go back and rewatch it for is Florence Pugh as the new
Yes.
Black Widow,
Yes.
and David Harbour. But I still haven't done that. Like the film's been out for going on 3 years now,
Mm-hmm.
and I still haven't, or I guess 2 years. I keep thinking it came out in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Time is weird, but it just didn't. It felt like a movie from the early, like it doesn't fit the MCU this phase that well.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't fit where they place it in the timeline of the MCU either. It's just a misfit.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm pretty sure we talked about this together, but it definitely felt like a contractual obligation film and not like a true attempt at a film for this character that should have had her own film long time ago.
yeah,
So I get that. Honestly, the whole bottom half of my list were all kind of tied together, and I put Black Widow higher up on my list, as you'll know. But I totally understand why you feel
yeah,
that way. My number 14 was Eternals. And the reason why I put that down there was because I was legit excited for this film, not because I knew anything about the history of these characters or the comic that it was based on, but just the way they hyped this film. They were bringing in this Academy Award winning director, they had this incredible cast. They hyped this up to be the Captain America Winter Soldier of the current phase. When Winter Soldier came out, it changed the landscape of what people could expect the MCU films to be. It really did feel fresh and new, and Eternals was definitely sold as this is not your average MCU film. It's a different look, it's a different director, it's a different tone. And what came out was generic and formulaic and forgettable, and I really didn't care for it. And the stellar cast, which they all have shined well in other films, they just, it was just muddy for me. Muddy and forgettable, and if we don't get a sequel, I will not mind at all, even though I think a lot of people hope that some of the things teased at the end will, come about. But yeah, I didn't care for it.
yeah. Obviously, I have Eternals a little bit higher than you do, so
Mm-hmm.
let's move
It'll be
on
interesting
to
to see where it tracks, though. Yeah.
yeah. Let's move on to your number 13.
Okay, at the end of this, you're gonna have to show everybody our full list so
Yeah,
they can
I've got 'em.
compare the whole things. My number 13 was She-Hulk.
Okay.
I liked certain things of this, but ultimately I thought it was a mess. It did those that self-aware thing that a lot of films and shows do, and it's usually a crux, like or they realize they're not that great of a movie or show, so they be self-aware and they joke about themselves in order to cleverly make themselves slightly better than the ones that don't joke about themselves. But in this case, they crammed that all into the finale, and it didn't excuse all of the episodes I had watched up until that point. So, they didn't have plot holes, but that's only because they just cut the plot off and said, actually, no, we're just not going to go in that direction. But I thought it was a waste of time and a waste of talent because she's great. She's great as She-Hulk, and I hope she gets another round at this. Maybe not in a show, but in future properties.
Yeah.
And the Daredevil highlight was good for me. I am hopeful for that. But overall, the show was disappointing.
Yeah, I'll give you the finale on that one. The finale does it does a lot of things well, but it plot wise it's a bit of a letdown.
Yeah.
My 13, and knowing where it is on your list, you're going to be surprised by this. Black Panther: Wakanda Forever.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Not that I like this movie a lot, but the more I think about it, it's not what I like. The rewatchability of these played a big factor in this, and I had this tied with some other things,
Okay.
but I'm not gonna some of these I was dying to go buy the Blu-ray, but this one I'm like I can wait. I don't need this one right away.
Okay. I can understand. I had disappointments with it for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's your number 12?
My number 12 is Eternals. So mine wasn't
Okay.
Eternals wasn't too much higher on my list.
Yeah.
I think Eternals does a lot of good, a lot of different things, style-wise that I really enjoyed. The look of the film's very different from anything else in the MCU. It's a little bit boring and a little bit long, but I saw it in a heated reclining seat, so I didn't really care that much. This was the last MCU Blu-ray I needed to buy, and I just bought it because I was like, oh, if I find it for cheap, I'll buy that, and I found it. So
Nice.
yeah, I'm okay with seeing a sequel to this because they set it up, and I was like, okay, if this is going to be set up, I want to see where you go with this. If you have a plan, execute that plan. I don't know if I need Harry Styles to be a part of that plan, but I'll take what I can get. So, if Patton Oswalt's involved, so.
Oh, that's right. He was the little CGI dude at the end. Yeah, I remember a lot of the critics out there were saying, oh, if you don't like this, it's only because it's different and you're just used to the standard. And, it was different, but in my mind, different doesn't make it good. It can still be a bad production if it's different, that doesn't automatically give it points for me. I was excited for it to be different. It just wasn't fulfilling for me. My number 12 is Moon Knight. Okay. Hell of a cast. Oscar Isaac, my guy. Oh my gosh,
Ethan
I'm
Hawke.
blanking on his name. Ethan Hawke. I love Ethan Hawke. My friends, my two best friends tell me that he's my man crush because I've just loved everything he's in. Unfortunately, I thought the show was a waste. I thought the pacing was all kind of craziness at times. I thought the CGI was not great. Oftentimes, I thought they focused too much on certain elements of the plot instead of focusing on other things. And the finale was just so over the top and silly that I just have no will to go watch this again. Will and it doesn't. If this doesn't get more, I won't be surprised. It feels like it could just be this one thing that they never broach again, or they feed him into some, Dark Avengers movie or something. But
Yeah.
it was a letdown of a show for me.
Okay.
All
right, and then moving on to your number 11.
Yeah, my number 11 was Miss Marvel. Not because I really didn't like it. I liked it enough. I just didn't really connect with it very well, and I thought that it was while it was like a cute story, it wasn't what's the word I'm trying to say? It just wasn't that grand of a story. It felt very small and very contained. Mm-hmm. The last scene definitely opens it up, and we'll get more of her in the Marvels, and I am excited to see her character in a movie setting, and among people we've already seen in the MCU in the films. For the show itself, other than a couple spots, I thought it was mostly just kind of forgettable.
Yeah. Okay. My number 11 is What If, and I think I really enjoyed a lot of the What If. Like I bought the action figures for it because I wanted the Watcher. So there's a lot that I liked about What If, but that finale, when they brought everything together, I just felt was forced and kind of put a damper on the whole thing for me. Like I'm okay with going back and revisiting the characters that we've seen in these What If episodes, but I didn't need it all to come together, and it just felt weird when it did. But yeah, that's my number 11.
Okay, I'll comment more on that when we get to it.
My
What's
number
your number 10?
My number 10 is Moon Knight.
Okay, so not far off.
Yeah, pretty much middle of the road at this point. Like we're kind of in the places where, like, yeah, this was good. It wasn't the worst, wasn't the best, but I liked Moon Knight a lot. I thought the suits looked fantastic. The casting, like you said, was great. It inspired me to buy an Engelbert Humperdinck record this weekend, so nice. I have it on the turntable now. But yeah, I like this show. I would like to see more of it, but not knowing what the plan is for this character going forward kind of puts it in the middle of the road. Like if I had an idea that Oscar Isaac is going to return for season 2, or he's going to be in this movie, like it'd be more worth it. But not knowing if there is a future for this character kind of makes the show not as rewatchable for me.
Yeah, that uncertainty around it. My number 10 was Hawkeye. I had a good time with it. I thought some parts were really fun. I thought this had the potential to be like Home Alone 2, Lost in New York type of Christmassy show, and it at times it was. I think the better parts of it was when Florence Pugh showed up. She brought a lot of charisma. I thought Haley Steinfeld? Is she the main character? I think she's fun, and I think her and Florence really bounced off each other really well. I kind of wanted, if this is supposed to be the Hawkeye send-off, and based on current events, this might be the Hawkeye send-off. I kind of wanted more Hawkeye, to be honest. But it wasn't a terrible show, and I'll probably, if we ever get that Echo show, which I've heard is in production hell right now, I'll probably go back and watch this again closer to that, just to kind of rev up for the Echo show. But yeah,
I thought they filmed it. I thought they were in post.
I've heard they've had like problems with it, like it keeps on getting delayed. Maybe it's in post. I don't know, but yeah.
All right.
What's your number 9?
My number 9,
is it my turn?
Yeah, it's your turn for the first one.
My number 9 is Black Widow. So your 14 is my 9.
Yes.
I really was disappointed by this film when it came out, but I have watched it since, and I think I've watched more reactions of it since, and I didn't like what they did with Taskmaster. I thought a lot of the CGI was wonky as hell, and I thought it was a disappointment for the character. But man, Florence Pugh, I really didn't like how much Florence Pugh was in it initially, but now having seen Hawkeye, I do appreciate the Florence Pugh stuff. And I'm a David Harbour fan, so there's highlights in there that I do like about it, but it is in the bottom half of my list. But yeah, that I felt that there was more redeemable things in that movie than some of the other things I've listed to put it there.
And
So.
like going back to this being towards the bottom of my list, I think part of that has to do with the experience of watching it, because this is the only one that went to Disney Plus, and that's how I watched it.
Yeah,
I didn't
things.
see it in theaters, and like this is 2 movies after Endgame, which is like one of the best movie going experiences, where you have a crowd reacting the way they do, and then you're watching this one at home on Disney Plus on your phone. Not that I watched it on my phone. I did not do that.
Did it come out simultaneously on Disney
Yeah.
Plus? Okay, I think we did see it in theaters.
Yeah.
We saw it once in theaters, and then I usually take my mom to see the movie because she's big into these, and we watch it on Disney Plus for her. So
Okay. Yeah, for me, it was a convenience thing because it came out on Disney Plus like the day before we left for vacation. I was like, well, we're not going to pack for 2 hours. We're just going to watch Black Widow and then get ready to go.
There you go.
All right, my number 9 is The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I like this show. I feel like it could have been a movie. There's a little bit of too much drawn out stuff, and I know they had to rewrite things because of the pandemic, and it just kind of falls apart a little bit. If you can see the holes in the story if you look close enough. The villain's not super developed, but I like Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan together. Like, give me more of that. Zemo was good in this. There was a lot that I liked about this. The new Captain America suit is fantastic. But at the end of the day, I feel like this could have been a movie instead of a miniseries.
Yeah, I have it a little higher on my list, but not incredibly higher. What's your number 8?
My number 8 is Loki.
Okay.
Middle of the road here with Loki. Loki was one of those things where you watched it week to week, and it was always something different, and it made sense to be a TV show. Probably not as much as some other things that we're going to talk about on this list, but it works as a TV show. I don't really see how you could do this as a movie, and I think they did some fun stuff with it. Like, just looking at the poster here, like Miss Minutes, like, and it's the only thing on this list that has a season 2. So,
yeah.
How about you? What's your number?
I have that. My number 8 was Doctor Strange: Multiverse of Madness.
Okay.
I put this in the middle because I did enjoy parts of the film. I did enjoy the Sam Raimi elements at times. It did bring me back to my childhood of watching Spider-Man films in the theater, because there were times where I'm like, man, this is definitely a Raimi production. And I liked WandaVision, and I liked seeing some extension of the things that happened in that show. But it was messy at times. There was really some bad CGI stuff at times. And if you're going to put a third eye on your main character, please take some time to make it look good. And I just didn't think it looked good. And I thought there were things that they could have explored a lot more. There was some cool, flyby stuff, some nods to What If, some nods to other things that haven't been introduced to the MCU before. but I felt like they spent too much time on those things and not the meat of the story, and certainly not the experience of the multiverse. We had a
Yeah.
quick, super quick montage thing, but then for the rest of the movie, it was really only like a couple universes, and it wasn't as stellar as it could have been. So it was disappointing, but still, in the middle for me because I still liked a lot of parts of it. So yeah.
Okay.
But my number 7 is What If. I thought that there were a lot of fun things in that. I was a little concerned at first because the first one was about Peggy. Had she got the serum, and the structure of that episode was basically redoing scenes from Captain America: The First
Yeah.
Avenger, but with her. And while I did like that, I really did like that, I was concerned this was going to be the structure of the rest of the season, and it didn't end up being that, and I appreciated that. And while I did feel that the finale was kind of rushed, all of a sudden we were throwing these characters into a story with the Watcher and Ultron. I did like Ultron coming back as the villain. I did like Killmonger, kind of still being Killmonger. And, if we get a second season of this, I really would like to see more of that. Not to mention, one of the best episodes was the zombie episode, and that was fantastic, and it was creepy, and it was well done, and I've heard talks of them expanding that, so I would love to see more of that.
Yeah,
so,
they're doing a whole zombie series, which will be interesting.
That sounds great.
And we are getting I forgot we are getting a season 2 of this, but it's animated, so that doesn't count.
What's your number 7?
My number 7 is She-Hulk. There's a lot that I enjoyed about this show. I like the meta humor that it has. It falls a little bit flat, and it's disappointing in the finale. But throughout the show, I love the fourth wall breaks. I like her as She-Hulk. I like the way they use Bruce Banner in this. Daredevil's appearances are fantastic. And I wish the show had leaned more into the week-to-week helping different heroes with legal issues. Because I think the show's strongest when you have Wong there, you have Bruce Banner, you have Daredevil. That's what the strongest episodes of this show are. Those, not to say that the episodes that focus on Jennifer Walters are weak, but I think having her interact with these other characters, who we know, is the show's strong suit.
Yeah, the cameo factor in that show was definitely strong. Yeah. What's your number 6?
My number 6 is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. I enjoyed this movie. I've been meaning to go back and revisit this one. I just haven't gotten to it yet. But it's a different kind of movie for the MCU. I like the way they do the fight scenes in this was fantastic. Ben Kingsley coming back as Trevor is fantastic. Yeah, this is a perfectly fine standalone MCU movie. It doesn't really tie into anything else that you have to see this. I like the little bits that they do connect it with Wong and Abomination, but it just stands on its own 2 feet, and I think that's kind of hard to do in the MCU these days. So,
okay. My number 6 was Falcon and the Winter Soldier, so not too far off from yours. Yeah. I really did like this show. I could see the cracks from the COVID issues with production and how they had to rewrite certain things. But I felt like this and Hawkeye were the best versions of what Kevin Feige initially said what Disney Plus was going to be. When he first kind of started talking about this and they did that whole, what's coming on Disney Plus type of event, he originally said these things aren't necessarily required viewing and that they were meant to be expansions of the characters, but if you never watched these shows and you just stuck with the theatricals, you'd be fine. And, Falcon and the Winter Soldier was came out, it was kind of thrown. The release structure of these shows were thrown in a mix because of COVID. But when it came out, I enjoyed getting an expansion of Bucky and an expansion of
Sam.
Sam. I really like both of those characters. I've loved Sam's growth ever since Winter Soldier, and the way that we left things in Endgame was, I wanted to see how these two characters really felt about that when it came down to it, and what the next steps were. And I thought that the villains weren't phenomenal, and there wasn't a lot of long-reaching things for the Marvel Universe that happened in the show, but there was expansions of the characters, and that's why I liked it. I wanted to see more of them, and so I appreciated it for that reason.
Okay.
But my number five is Loki, and I wasn't sure how to feel about this show, but over time I've liked it more. I think I was frustrated initially with it because I just didn't really know where it was going, and if it was as good as it seemed it was. But I do appreciate the show more now than I did then, and especially with how much of the Phase 4 properties felt like just standalone stuff. This does set up Kang, and with Ant-Man and the Wasp coming, and the Kang Dynasty coming, I am excited about what happens in season 2 of Loki, and I felt like the little universe that this show has needed a second season, where a lot of these shows didn't feel like they earned a second season. So that's why I put Loki at my number 5. What's yours?
My number 5 is Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. I pretty much agree with a lot of what you said. I will add Pizza Papa for life. I think there's I enjoy the cameos in here. Danny Elfman does a lot of fun things with the musical score of this, from including the X-Men theme when Xavier shows up to the whole musical battle. And I think America Chavez is great in this. I'm looking forward to seeing more of her. I know a lot of people gave her flack, but I liked her in this. And the Sam Raimi-ness of it all takes me back to the good old days of Spider-Man movies at the drive-ins. So, that's my number 5.
Okay.
My number 4 is Ms. Marvel. This was a nice, refreshing the style of Ms. Marvel, I think, is what I enjoyed the most, because it plays with her personality, and it makes the show pop a little bit more. Like the way it's stylized and breaks into musical numbers randomly. It's just a lot of fun for me, and I really enjoyed her as Kamala Khan. I'm excited to see her in the Marvels with Photon and Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
But I would love to see what they do with this character going forward in another season or her own movie. But yeah, she's so energetic and so happy to be there that it just makes you happy to watch it. So
yeah. My number 4 was Shang-Chi and Legend of the Ten Rings. I grew up reading Iron Man comics. Like, I didn't collect them as much as I did Batman comics, but I did really appreciate him, and the Mandarin was one of his bigger villains. And so to see it wasn't, I mean, it's kind of a retcon, but it wasn't really they wrote around the whole Iron Man 3 Mandarin thing with Ben Kingsley, and to see them kind of course correct that, I did like that. There's a lot of things in the first half of this film that I thought were great, in terms of the lore, in terms of the choreography. There's a lot of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon type stuff in here that I really appreciated. The martial arts were fantastic. The second half of the film got more magical and relied more on powers. And so if we see more of Shang-Chi in the future, I hope they don't just go with the powers of the rings, but they continue to put more martial arts in there because what's his name? Simu Liu, is that his name? The main. He's great. Yeah. He fought for this role. He kind of willed himself into this, and he was great. And while it was sad that they killed off, another great bad guy in the MCU, at least it was a solid film. And I honestly didn't know what to expect from it, and I was kind of floored by the quality of it, and I had a really good time. And it does, have teasers for what's to come. So, and Awkwafina was funny in it too. I don't think she necessarily needs to be his sidekick going forward, but I wouldn't mind seeing, some more of her in the future. I thought she was less irritating than Jane Foster's friend in the first couple Thor films.
Darcy,
which she's better in WandaVision, but I thought Awkwafina was actually funny, and I laughed a good amount of times. So yeah.
All right. And then
my number 3.
Yes.
My number 3 would be WandaVision. I thought WandaVision was a hell of a show. I, again, didn't know what to expect from it. This was the first Disney Plus show that came out. It wasn't meant to be, but it was. That is the release order.
The case, yeah.
Yeah. And we didn't know what to expect. Didn't know what to expect from Disney Plus Marvel shows at all. We didn't know how long episodes were supposed to be, what the structure was, if it was a serious story, if it was just kind of filler content. And WandaVision kept us guessing, from the different styles, even everything down to the length of the episode kind of mirrored the style and the era of TV that you were watching. There were some things that I wanted more of, or I didn't really like, especially with a certain X-Men cameo that wasn't really a cameo and how they did that. But I loved Agatha. I loved furthering and cementing this relationship between Vision and Wanda. And while I didn't agree with some of the ways they presented her as at the end, I liked that there's a good amount of people that watch the show that thought Wanda was a villain at the end, and Multiverse of Madness kind of solidified that. So I had a really good time with the show, and that's why it's in the top 3.
Okay.
What's yours?
My number 3 is Hawkeye.
Wow. Okay.
I really enjoyed the New York at Christmas aspect of this show. I like the inspiration it took from the Matt Fraction run of the Hawkeye comic, and just the sense of humor that it has. Like, I'm a sucker for anything set at Christmas that's not an actual Christmas movie. Like, Shane Black, give it to me. So it had that feel to it. I could have used more Hawkeye in it, but I think Haley Steinfeld did great in it. Her and Florence Pugh, their chemistry is fantastic. I want to see more of that in the MCU. And then Vincent D'Onofrio returning as Kingpin for the finale. I'm so glad they were able to get him. And the fight scene between him and Kate Bishop is insane. And I cannot wait to see more in Daredevil Born Again. So
yeah, I'm gonna need more time with the new version of Vincent's Kingpin, because I felt like this was maybe leaning a little more towards the cartoonish Kingpin. They definitely took outfit choices from the comics.
Yeah.
And that I think that action lended more towards the old Spider-Man animated series version of Kingpin that I grew up with, which isn't bad, but it definitely did feel like a departure, and there wasn't enough of him. I was looking into things too much. Like, the Kingpin from the Daredevil shows wouldn't put up with this level of goons that he's
Yeah.
putting up with in this show. So I'm hoping to get an expansion of his character in Daredevil to appreciate him more. But it's Vincent D'Onofrio, so that wins me over just to a certain degree anyway. So
Friend of the show, Vincent D'Onofrio.
what's your number 2?
My number 2 is WandaVision. But you said something that made me regret that. Like, I almost changed my whole list when you mentioned the Ralph Boner of it all, because I completely forgot that was a thing. But beyond the X-Men cameo that doesn't pay off at all, WandaVision is the only Disney Plus show that we've talked about that only would make sense as a Disney Plus show. There's no other way to tell this story. It's the only one that makes the most sense for the format of episodic television. And I think they use that to their advantage to tell the story that they tell. And it's a masterclass in storytelling because it plays with the format every week. And then there's some of my favorite moments of the MCU in this, like the ship of Theseus scene with the 2 Visions, and then Vision's line of, "What is grief if not love persevering?" Like,
That's
there's
such
just
a good line.
such a great line. And oh man, I want to go back and watch it again. And the fact that we're getting a sequel series to this with Agatha is bizarre to me, but I'm like, okay, like they're bringing back so many of the side characters that you're like, I don't hate these people. Like it'll be interesting to see what happens with that show, but this was a tough one for me to not put at number 1. So
it definitely, I mean, it was a strong show. I think the finale showed some cracks for related to COVID. All of a sudden, Darcy was just gone, and the rush thing of the bad guy just shooting at the kids and
and for a lot of things, I've been very forgiving about that kind of stuff because of COVID restrictions and like how things happen in Hollywood. So I can look at, like, the finale does have its flaws, but I think leading up to that, like, it's a solid show. And
I think Doctor Strange does redeem that ending, because when Rambo said, they'll never know what you sacrificed for them, I was like, how dare you? How dare you mess with the quality of this show? Because I hated that line. I was like, she tortured an entire town. Don't throw that in my face. And while the Avengers didn't come after her in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, the show still painted her as a villain of sorts. And so I think that redeemed that moment for me. My number 2 was Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. I was surprised how low it was on your list, but I did have several disappointments in this film. I thought it did drop the ball in certain narrative structures. I think it had that huge obstacle that it had to get around that none of these other shows had to deal with. Yeah, COVID was an obstacle, but you didn't suddenly lose your main star. Not to mention the story was already written. It was done. It was a similar film, but it wasn't exactly. But at the end of the day, the production value, for the most part, was stellar. I felt like there were times throughout Phase 4 where it just didn't feel like they gave it their all for an MCU film, and this, I really did feel like this was expanding the MCU universe, and that this was putting a step forward and really giving it your all. And while I don't agree with some of the personal beliefs of the main actress, I thought she, for the most part, did really well. I think it looks like we're getting some Oscar nominations for Miss Bassett. She was fantastic in her role. And, I might have disagreed with the storyline and some of the direction of the characters, but it was a strong, well-made movie, and that's I had to put it up there for the production value. I think in my mind, that's why it's so high.
Yeah, I mean the production value is there. I think part of my problem with it is like Avatar came out 3 weeks after it, so all the underwater stuff with there is like, you could see Wakanda Forever would have ranked higher if M'Baku punched a whale. For me,
sure. Sure.
That's where I'm at with it. And you're completely right about the story and the obstacles that they faced, and yeah, I don't know if you figured it out, but we have the same number one.
Yeah, I have figured that out. I just realized that. Yeah, deservingly so. I think me and you are both old school Spider-Man fans.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember how you felt about the Andrew Garfield films, but I really liked Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I think it gets way more flack than it deserves. And this film, I mean, the nostalgia factor is crazy for this, and it definitely elevates the film. But I thought it was a solid blockbuster event, and it did feel like the biggest blockbuster of this phase for me.
Go figure. The guys who host a podcast called Brilliant But Lazy picked the one with Otto Octavius as their number one for Phase 4. Spider-Man No Way Home is just a love letter to the Spider-Man franchise, with the villains coming back, and then Toby and Andrew coming back with Tom, and it's so much fun. It was like one of the best theater experiences I've had. Like, I went 3 times opening weekend to see it.
It was one of the few times where people hooted and hollered, and I wasn't annoyed, because I was like, yes, yes, he's back. Holler, cheer.
I don't often go see re-releases in theaters, but I went and saw this when it was re-released with the extended cut.
You did.
But there's so much I could go on forever talking about how much I love this film. It's maybe not the best of the Spider-Man franchise overall, but it's the highlight of Phase 4 for me. Especially when we're in the multiverse saga. Like, this is the film that plays with that the best. Like, I think they do a better job with multiverse stuff here than they do in Doctor Strange, at least from what I want from a multiverse story, when you have all of these characters. And I'm sure we're going to get that down the line with Secret Wars. We're going to get more of the stuff that worked in here. So,
well, I told you this when we reviewed the movie, but it elevated Tom Holland's Spider-Man so much for me. I mean, he's definitely won me over the years. It's hard not to like him as Spider-Man, but I personally, when they first brought him out, I was really irritated that we were going so young with high school Spider-Man. That is not the Spider-Man I grew up on. I grew up on the college kid who already had a job at the Planet, or not at the Planet, Bugle. At the Bugle, and he was struggling through life as a young man and as a superhero. And I was like, why the hell did they make him so young? And this film kind of graduates him from that youthfulness, and it ends on a not so happy note for him. He is alone. He is on his own. Nobody knows him. And I just thought that set up so much potential for his character moving forward, both in the MCU and in his own kind of separate Sony universe. And so, I thought it was really well done, the ending of that movie specifically.
Yeah. God, I could go on forever talking about this movie.
For sure.
The one thing I will say is they need to release the extended cut on Blu-ray, because I cannot find for sure that they did. You can buy it digitally, but I want it on Blu-ray. So,
well,
come on,
and just to be clear, it is not necessarily an extended cut. It is an alternate cut, because they didn't just add things in. They did take some things out, right? Weren't there some alternate scenes
there's some additional scene, like, it's not really alternate. They're
So I thought
marketing.
they did remove some stuff for that cut
I don't think
to
they
highlight
remove,
other things.
I don't think they remove much.
Okay.
But they're marketing the digital version as the extended cut. So
Oh, okay. All right.
um,
Okay.
yeah.
Before we leave the Phase 4 talk and go on to our top 10 comic book films, I did have one question for you. Now
Yes.
that we've looked back over Phase 4, a theme of this phase was younger, newer versions or just younger potential Avengers being brought into the story. You had, like you said, America Chavez. You had the new Black Widow and Florence Pugh's character. You had Haley Steinfeld's new Hawkeye. You had Love. You had Miss Marvel.
Yeah.
Of all of those, which do you think was the strongest introduction for one of these younger characters?
I gotta say Florence Pugh.
Yeah,
Maybe,
it's kind of hard not to.
it's a tie between her and Haley Steinfeld, just because of the way they work together. Because you bring in all these other characters, and they're all by themselves, but the two of them together, you can see a dynamic there that's refreshing and different from what you had between Tony Stark and Steve Rogers. It's not one that you've seen before, and I'm excited to see that in the future because I hope that we get more of that.
Yeah, she's definitely a strong actor to begin with,
Yeah.
and a strong character, and I think she'll bring a lot to the thing. I did like America Chavez's the look of her powers. You know, they kind of went in a choice direction for her
Yeah.
power set based on her character in the comics. But when she did do her star portal thing, it did look pretty cool, and I did like her. But I'm not necessarily saying I'm excited for a young Avengers thing. But I for the most part, Love was the only one that was kind of forced, or the least excited for the future.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I did like these new additions, and I'm excited to see where each of them go.
Yeah. All right. So with that, that's our ranking of our top 10, or our, not even our, that's our ranking for Marvel Phase 4. Now we're going to get into our top 10 superhero movie or comic book movies of all time. So we
Yes.
don't really this runs the gamut from Marvel to DC to Dark Horse. There's
Yeah.
a whole bunch
The
of
only-
ones in here.
The caveat was, or the rule was, it had to be based on a previously existing comic. So it's not something that the movie came out and then they made a comic of it. It had to exist first. I don't know if you did any animated movies. I personally decided not to do animated movies, even though there's a ton of great animated movies out there.
I did not. There were no animated
Okay.
movies on mine.
Okay.
So
Sounds good. And we didn't do, this isn't our top, this is our number 1, this is our number 10, to make it easier, because, when you get into your favorites, it's hard to rank them over each other. So I just picked my top 10, and
Yeah.
they're in no specific order.
Although, since you had it in my brain not to include animated movies, and I completely forgot about Spider-Verse. So
It does rank high for me. I
It does.
considered putting it on my list, but it's I was shooting for more live action
yeah.
stuff.
We'll talk about our love for Into the Spider-Verse when Across the Spider-Verse comes out. So
Part 1.
all right, let's
Yeah.
start off with your. You've got the order there, so you got Blade 2.
Blade 2. Blade 2 is fantastic. Wesley Snipes. You still have not seen Blade 2.
I have not seen any of the Wesley Snipes Blade movies.
Those movies did so much for the younger days of Marvel. They were R-rated films. They were graphic vampire films. Blade Trinity shit show aside, the first two movies were fantastic, and it showed that there was a general audience interest in a character that was based on a comic that was not your Superman and your Batman.
Yeah.
Wesley Snipes, even though he became a diva, he was fantastic in these movies. And Blade 2 with Guillermo del Toro behind the camera is just chef's kiss. I remember I was not allowed to see this in the theaters, but I saw it in the basement of a friend's house, and I'm like, holy shit, this is grand, well done filmmaking, and I absolutely loved it, and that's why it's in my top 10.
Okay.
What's your first one we're gonna talk about?
My first one is Kick-Ass.
Okay.
With Aaron Taylor Johnson and Nick Cage.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
I remember seeing this in college and like really enjoying the film, and Nicolas Cage's performance where he's pretty much doing an Adam West impression. This is different from a lot of the superhero movies that we've gotten from Marvel and DC just because of the gore and the violence of it and the language. Like, it's just a great R-rated superhero comedy. And it made Chloe Grace Moretz a star. Like, before this, she was just a kid actor, but now after this, she was in everything. So
yeah, she did blow up after this. She did blow up. Well, and all of the comics. What is that? Mark
Millar. Yeah.
All of his are of that. It's kind of like The Boys, edgy, superhero-esque, but pushing the envelope and kind of flipping things on its head. And we got the Kingsman because Kick-Ass did so well, and there's other comics that he's done that's being considered for properties. And I think The Boys is so successful because films like Kick-Ass laid the groundwork for it. So yeah, it's a good film.
All right.
What's your next one?
Your next one.
My next one.
Yeah, we alternate it for this one. So you got Superman the movie. You specified the 3-hour long version.
That's correct, because what they used to do back in the day for films was instead of releasing an extended cut, they would sell the deleted scenes and the extended cuts to TV studios for when that film released on TV. And Superman was originally like a 2-hour and I think 7-minute film, and there was a whole nother hour of footage that they put together for the TV version. And was it as tight of a film? No. But the original Superman with Christopher Reeves was so just groundbreaking and immersive and fantastic that when I grew up, I just wanted as much of it as possible. And this was before we got into the repetitive sequels and some other things that, while there was highlights in the other films, they did just kind of they didn't have the specialness of that first one. And so the first time I saw that 3-hour version of Superman, I was just like, yes, this is give it all to me. It's fantastic. And on top of that, just the original Superman film is a very strong film. I've always appreciated that film.
I'm curious, when was the first time you saw the 3-hour long version? Because I know they just put it out on Blu-ray a few years ago.
Yeah, I saw it in my teens. Someone had a VHS copy of it from when it was released on TV. It was recorded. Okay. And then as soon as they dropped that Blu-ray, I bought that sucker up because I was like, because I'd seen it, I go to Grand Comic Fest in Grand Island, Nebraska, and one of the years on the Friday night before the Comic-Con kicks off, they always show an old comic book film or an old nerdy film on their single screen theater in town, and they showed the original Superman, and I hadn't seen it for years, and I loved it, but I was like, wait, I remember more of this, and I remember this scene, and then that Blu-ray came out months later, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the thing that I loved so much in my younger years, and I bought that sucker up so quick.
I bought it. I tried watching it for when we did Superman the movie on my podcast, because I'm going to be different and watch the extended cut. And I was like, I didn't make it off of Krypton, and I was 45 minutes into it.
It's so long. It's so long.
I was like, I'm going to have to give this another shot. And I think you've inspired me to do that here soon. Like, I'll have to put it in and watch it one night. Yeah. Along the same vein, like I have a big sweet spot for Christopher Reeve's Superman. My pick for him, though, is Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut.
Yes, it is a good one.
I like the Donner cut a bit more than the Superman 2 that was in theaters. Uh,
Yeah.
Mostly because of the Jor-El stuff. Like, it just makes more sense to me than his mother being there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it doesn't have the magical kiss at the end. There's just a lot more that I like about this movie than I like in the theatrical.
And you weren't the only person. People acted like the release, the Snyder cut, was the first time that this has ever happened. There was
Yeah.
a huge campaign to release the Donner cut. And there was a lot of behind the scenes drama between the producers, between the actors, between the directors for Superman 2. And when that kind of came out and people found out that there was stuff, enough of the Richard Donner cut to make a Richard Donner cut, there was a huge push for that. And
Yeah.
that's why we got that. I love that cut mostly for the Superman reveal, because in that cut, Lois Lane shoots him with the
Yeah.
gun. That doesn't happen because it was too much for the theatrical cut of Superman
Yeah.
2. But I loved it, and I loved it mostly for Christopher Reeves's immediate change. As soon as she fires that gun, he's serious, and he's kind of almost offended by it, like he does not
Yeah.
like the fact that she almost killed Clark Kent, on a hunch. And I
Yeah.
just love that scene. I love
That and the fact that scene was from a screen test, and he's
Yes.
he's that in character in a screen test, and
Oh,
they
he gave
both
it all.
they,
Yeah.
they both gave their all to that performance, and it works so well.
Mhm.
God, I want to watch this now. All right, what is your next one?
My next one was The Rocketeer.
Okay.
It's a fantastic set of comics. But The Rocketeer was a Disney film that came out, and everything from the direction of that film to the score to the actors, it was just, it feels like an old school Disney film, but it's it was great. I loved, as a kid, having a film that I could watch with the Nazis as the villain. Timothy Dalton was this fantastic villain. I just loved him as the villain. And young Jennifer Connelly was great. And Billy Campbell, this is one of
Yeah.
the few films that he's done where he's the good guy, because he kind of got a reputation for being the terrible, lover in a lot of films later in his life. But he was great. He was great in this film, and I always wanted a sequel. And over the years, just like films like The Last Starfighter, this is one of those films that they've always teased. Hey, we're working on a sequel or a revival or a remake, and it is yet to happen, because I think they struggle with how to create it without ripping off Iron Man or something like that. But it was really good, and it's also one of the reasons why I love Captain America, the first Avenger, so much, because it's directed by the same guy, and it had a
Yeah.
lot of the same feels and tone, and yeah, it's just a good film.
Okay. My next one on the list is Jim Carrey's The Mask.
Of course.
I grew up with this film. I don't know why I was allowed to watch it as a 5-year-old, but I was. Looking back on it now, it's like, wow. Okay, mom and dad. But I just got the soundtrack to this the other week at a antique store, and oh man, it just I've been wanting to go back and rewatch this, but this is such a big part of my childhood. I would quote this all the time, like Party, because I gotta. But Jim Carrey had such a great year in '94 with this and Ace Ventura and Dumb and Dumber, but this is like the one that I saw the most out of all of those. And my favorite part of the CD that I got, because I still buy CDs, don't judge me, was the booklet is the movie in comic book form.
Oh wow!
So I was like, that's amazing. This was worth the $1 that I bought it for, and then some. So
Wasn't it Cameron Diaz's first film?
yeah,
Too?
Cameron Diaz.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
Good film.
Yeah.
Terrible sequel, but good.
Terrible. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
The less said about any Jim Carrey sequel that doesn't have Jim Carrey in it is not good. Because they did it.
I'd watch Bruce Almighty over Son of the Mask. So I'll say that.
Which would you rather watch, Son of the Mask or Ace Ventura Jr.?
I don't think I've seen Ace Ventura Jr., but
Okay.
I hated Son of the Mask. So
Well, I just figured out some stuff I'm going to do for the Victims Patreon from this conversation.
Great.
So
Great.
if you're interested, let me know. Your next one is
X-Men 2000. This film blew my mind as a kid. I was all over this film. They released the novelization for this before it came out, and this was before the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, and with the exception of things like Blade, those were R-rated films that weren't really geared towards the mass audience. It was geared towards R-rated action films, and X-Men just felt like the first in a long time real push for the legitimacy of comic book films. And it just had this cast, and back then people didn't bitch as much as they do now about, oh, the character doesn't look like the character, or at least they didn't have Twitter and everything to bitch as loudly about it. Because I know people weren't happy with Hugh Jackman's Wolverine at first, because it wasn't the Wolverine in the comics, and they did make choices that weren't comic friendly, like the spandex joke and everything, but man, they were just so cool. They in their black leather and Cyclops and everybody and Charles Xavier growing up on Star Trek The Next Generation, just seeing Patrick Stewart come in as such another such iconic character.
Yeah.
It was everything for me growing up, and I obsessed over that film so much.
I was never huge in the X-Men growing up. Like, I never really watched the animated series. I saw them on the Spider-Man animated series. It's like, okay, these guys seem cool, but I didn't commit to their show. But I ended up seeing this in theaters, and I saw every X-Men movie in theaters up until Dark Phoenix, because I'm a completionist, but even I have standards. But yeah, no, this franchise is great. Like, there are so many great comic book moments in this with Hugh Jackman and a bunch of the other characters. But for me, my favorite X-Men movie is X-Men First Class, because it changes the characters out, takes you to the 1960s, and really having it set in the 60s is like such a great change of pace for the X-Men films. And like, you get the friendship between Xavier and Magneto. Just the style of this film. This is another Matthew Vaughn film. I tried not to do two directors on this, like the same director twice, but I guess I did unintentionally, because he also did Kick-Ass.
Yeah.
But just the style of this film, the score, this is definitely the best of the prequels that they did.
Yeah, I really liked First Class. I thought it was a breath of fresh air, especially after X3 and people not knowing how to touch that franchise. I really like Days of Future Past as well, but I do feel like the concept of taking the X-Men all the way back to the 60s and seeing the origins of things back then really worked. But then as they built up to that and tried to connect it with the original X-Men franchise, it just got progressively worse. But yeah, First Class was a solid film.
Yeah.
Yeah. But go ahead.
Yeah, when it's like 4 years between films, but they're jumping like 20 years and no one's age. It's like, okay.
No one's age. I get that they're mutants, but
yeah, but still.
Yeah, and I did my 90s were Batman the Animated Series, X-Men the animated series and Spider-Man the animated series. So when X-Men came first before Spider-Man, I just it was incredible to me. And then right after, because of the coolness of the X-Men, they launched, it's one of the few X-Men runs I have completely. They launched this Ultimate X-Men comic run, which was this edgier version that was kind of a mix between what we saw in the movies and what we saw in the 90s cartoon, and it just solidified X-Men. So I really did they weren't my favorite superheroes growing up, obviously, but
Yeah.
they were up there. And so yeah, the X-Men films, and to be fair, they had a lot of missteps, but they were the first. I mean,
Yeah.
universe. You know, they were there before the MCU, and I think the MCU learned off of them.
Yeah.
I think.
And now they're bringing them into the MCU. So.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right.
My next film could easily be the best film on this. If I had to pick a number one, it would easily be this film. It is The Dark Knight. This is a masterpiece. Christopher Nolan made an incredible movie with Batman Begins, and he did what so many directors and producers had tried to do in the years between Batman and Robin and Batman Begins. Try to figure out a way to reinvigorate this franchise. There was so many directions that it almost took, and so many legendary directors that came and went. I mean, just looking at all the ones that raised their hands and almost got a movie, it's incredible. But Batman Begins was just cool. The Dark Knight was a cinematic masterpiece. I mean, nobody thought Heath Ledger would be a compelling Joker, and he's still considered probably the best Joker we've ever had. And a lot of people came out of this saying, this is not just a comic book film, this is a film. It is a movie, you know, it's not just a comic book movie. And it's what put Christopher Nolan on the map, especially with his obsession with IMAX. And it was one of the best movie theater experiences I've ever had. I'm sure I've told you this, but the short story is I was backpacking in Europe for a month on my own, and I was in Rome when this movie came out, and I knew I wanted to see it. I didn't want to wait 3 weeks to get back on base to see it in the UK. So I spent my first day in Rome, not going to the Colosseum, not going to the Vatican, but going to every theater I could find until I found the one that played it in English, not in dubbed. I couldn't imagine seeing this film dubbed.
Yeah.
And so I did, and it was a midnight version, but the theater was packed, and everybody cheered at the end of that film and gave it a standing ovation, and I joined them because I felt it deserved it.
No, it's definitely a masterpiece. I will give you that. Nothing you said is wrong. This film did put Christopher Nolan on the map. Dark Knight Rises is better. No, I'm kidding. Personally, if I had to pick a Nolan Batman movie, it would be Batman Begins, which is my next one. It's such a great origin story. And a lot of films have copied the style of Batman Begins for origin stories since then.
Yes.
But yeah, you wouldn't have the Dark Knight if it wasn't for this, and I think this sets the groundwork for the Dark Knight and the Dark Knight Rises, and even to a certain extent, the Snyderverse, because Christopher Nolan was involved in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, so like a lot of like you could compare Batman Begins to Man of Steel, and there's a lot of similarities there style wise.
Yeah.
But just the scores alone with Hans Zimmer, it like the whole trilogy is great. But Batman Begins is my go-to since you took the Dark Knight.
Batman Begins has my ultimate respect because unlike so many of the refreshes and reboots within these comic films over the years, Nolan decided to go with villains that had never been on screen before. and start the film in a spot where we didn't have a Commissioner Gordon and things like that. He totally, this was an origin film that threw everybody in the dark, fans of Batman and non-fans of Batman, as to where this film would go and where it would start and where the characters were. It was very well done in terms of storytelling, and the villains were great, and it did set up Dark Knight. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right.
My next film is Logan. I tried not to do multiple films in a series or universe, but I couldn't help but do Logan. From that first X-Men film, Hugh Jackman was always the highlight, and but it got to a point, even with his solo films, that you wondered if they would ever give his character the depth and the grandeur of what they gave him in the comics. There was a lot of heavier storytelling around him in the comics, and the Old Man Logan comic series, which is nothing like the movie, but it was great. And it felt like Logan as a character deserved it. And so when they gave him this movie, a lot of people were like, it's not going to work. An R-rated film. But when those first trailers dropped with the Hurt song playing over, I mean, I still go back and watch reaction videos of that every once in a while to get the genuine, like, just shock on people's faces. Like, this is not what I expected. And the film lived up to it. It was so damn good. And it, you know, it was like an unofficial end to the X-Men series that I grew up on that started in 2000. And it was just so much more than I expected to be, even though it was a fairly small bottle film. And it was excellent filmmaking, in my opinion.
Yeah. I've only seen this the one time in theaters. And I haven't revisited. Really? Yeah, I need to, especially with him coming back in Deadpool 3. Mm-hmm. No, I need to revisit this. I just haven't. I don't know why.
And there's a black and white version now too, if you wanted to see it.
Yeah,
black and white.
I know how to change the settings on my TV though, so I can watch anything in black and white. So.
You know, the director of Logan is doing the next Indiana Jones film, so I wonder if he'll give Indiana Jones as much of a send-off as he did Logan.
Assuming that this is the last Indiana Jones movie.
Assuming, sure. Harrison
Ford's probably still got 3 more in him, or if he doesn't, Disney's going to make him. I didn't tell you, but I have the Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny poster in the mail on the way to me. So
I'm sure you do. It does not surprise me.
My next one is Iron Man 3.
Oh wow!
As I said before,
that's a choice.
It is a choice. Shane Black's one of my favorite directors. I love the Christmas feel to this. I like the journey that Tony Stark goes on. Like, this is the first time that we actually see like a hero have to deal with the aftermath of what they did to save the world. Like, this is him dealing with the PTSD of everything from the Avengers, and that personal journey that he takes to heal from that, and what that means for him and his relationship with Pepper. And I really enjoy this movie. It's my favorite of the Iron Man trilogy for sure. But I'm a sucker.
Strong words.
I mean, wow. The first one, like, it's definitely better than 2. The first one is hard to beat.
It's iconic.
Yeah. It's iconic, yeah. It's up on a pedestal, but this is one of my favorite sequels of the MCU. So
okay,
yeah.
I think it ranks lower for most people. It's definitely grown in my appreciation for it has definitely grown over time.
Yeah.
It was I went to it with a family member, and they were so pissed at it that they walked out of the theater and made a whole scene, and then made a whole scene of me not following them out of the theater, so then I had to go follow them, and I missed chunks of the film, And then when I came back, I was just like, and I didn't like the Mandarin reveal, even
Yeah.
though I love Guy Pearce. But upon later watches, I ended up appreciating it more.
Yeah.
I don't agree that it's the best in the Iron Man
I didn't say
movies,
it was the
but
best. I said it was my favorite.
okay, okay, okay.
So
Well,
there's the
that's an
difference.
interesting choice. I would not have
Yeah.
expected that, but good for
Yeah.
you.
All right.
My next one is Spider-Man 2. And while I was floored by Spider-Man 1 when that came out in 2002, I was just like, wow, I and they sold it so well. Like nobody expected Spider-Man to look this good, and the swinging and everything, and it was a big deal. And had James Cameron made his film, I would have been interested to see what kind of Spider-Man film he came out with. But Spider-Man 1 was incredible. Spider-Man 2, though, for me, like Dark Knight with the Nolan Batman franchises, it was just a all-around better film. And from what we know now, it was supposed to be the first film, but the studios just didn't think that Octavius was a good villain for the debut film, so they held it back. But I thought the story was better, thought the fight scenes were better, I thought the character development was better, and I thought the overall production was just this amazing film. And I think they even released an extended cut later that I loved owning in my collection when I collected DVDs, because I was just like, this is already a great film. Now I have the extended edition. But I love that film.
I had never heard that this was supposed to be the first film.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they might have changed certain elements for it to be more of an origin film, but he was supposed to be the first villain.
Okay.
And they just didn't think audiences would like it if he was the first villain. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
This is on my list too. So, when we came up with we're going to do the top 10 superhero comic book movies for ourselves, I was like, I know what number one is, and it's this. For all the reasons you just said, but also like the video game is one of my favorite video games of all time. The soundtrack has been on my phone since I've had a phone. Like, and before that, it was on my iPod and my MP3 player, and I had it on CD that I would take with my Walkman. Like, I love everything about this film. So I got the theatrical poster behind me.
There it is.
But yeah, this is when people ask me what my favorite film of all time is. This is my go-to. I always forget that it's my go-to, and I stammer, and I'm like, I don't know. Spider-Man 2. But yeah, this is one of my favorite. Like, when I pulled the images for this, for our slideshow here on the video, I had to rename everything quick. As I give everything abbreviated titles, and I just put this one as GOAT. But yeah. So that's on my list too. Like, absolutely, and the extended cut, the Spider-Man 2.1.
Yes, that's what they call it.
I still enjoy that. I enjoy that one a little bit more than the theatrical, because it adds just enough to make it different.
Yeah,
and tweaks a little bit here and there, but like it adds more depth to it. And you don't usually get that in an extended cut. Usually it's just like, oh, here's more jokes. But there it adds more with like the Peter and Harry dynamic, and I really enjoy that. Maybe that's something we can revisit on this show at some point.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I sat down and watched it, so yeah, for sure.
Next, since that one was yours, and I just kind of hung on to the tails of that, my next one is Guardians of the Galaxy, the first Guardians.
Solid.
Guardians of the Galaxy was the first time that I knew about the characters beforehand, not from an animated series or cartoons or anything like that. I was reading the Guardians comics. I got to know Peter Quill and Groot and Rocket through the comics in the 2012 run that Brian Michael Bendis did. I would go to the comic book shop in college, and I bought issue 0.1, and then I was buying it for the first whole arc of the story. Like, I have those issues. So seeing these characters come to life on the big screen, like, I was excited for it for it. And then the film just blew me away with the soundtrack and the acting. Like, I never knew Dave Bautista before this, but he blew me away as Drax. I loved Chris Pratt at the time from Parks and Recreation, so seeing him in this was wonderful. But yeah, this one of the highlights of the MCU for me.
Well, and it changed the landscape of the MCU. You know, this is what I was hoping Eternals could possibly do, but it's one of those films that it wasn't like the MCU was getting stale, but it needed to be opened up a bit. And we hadn't, granted, Thor had been a little bit in space, but we hadn't really done that much with space. And Guardians of the Galaxy really, you know, you had a tree character and a raccoon character. It was a big gamble of whether or not people could really connect with these characters, and James Gunn just brought it home. I mean, it was great. Yeah, good choice.
Yeah.
My next one was The Road to Perdition. This was not. I did not know this was it was based on a graphic novel. I had not read the graphic novel before I saw this film. This film came out in 2002. It is a hell of a good film. It's a gangster crime noir style film, and it was one of those films where I didn't get to watch a lot of R-rated films growing up, but there was always tiers of R-rated films, and this was one of them that my dad would let me watch. You know, like The Matrix was rated R, but it was barely. You know, a lot of these films, they weren't gratuitous and they weren't overly gory, and they might have some cuss words in it, but it wasn't incredibly sexual, and so I could watch certain films with him, and this was one of the ones that I watched, and it just had a good story, and Paul Newman was in it, and I loved him from growing up with oh gosh, what was the he was in so many films, but he was in
Butch Cassidy?
The Sting. He was in Butch Cassidy, but I loved him in The Sting. That was one of the first films I ever saw with my grandpa, and so seeing him in this film, Jude Law, Daniel Craig, Tom Hanks, it was a fantastic kind of gangster cast, and I really loved the story. And then a couple years later, I found out that it was based on a graphic novel, and I went and read it, and I loved the graphic novel, and it was one of those rare films that it was like, what? This is based on a comic? And it kind of, you know, I think that kind of surprised people that there were graphic novels out there that weren't necessarily superhero comics and that had good stories, and that definitely made me look at other titles that I would have never looked into because they didn't have the normal style comics that I'd read at that point. And so I appreciated what this film did for the graphic novel community.
Yeah. All right, cool. I need to see the movie and I need to read the book because I haven't done either yet. So.
Oh, it's good. It's a classic.
I did read Scott Pilgrim versus the World. So, and this film is so much fun. Edgar Wright's a great director, and the cast in this is stacked. You've got, just looking at it, the poster here, you've got, I forget who she played in Birds of Prey, but you got a Bird of Prey, you've got Superman, you've got Captain America, you've got Robin from the Lego Movie, Captain Marvel's in here. It's such a fun and like different kind of movie. Like the video game influence is there, and it's just a lot of fun. The soundtrack's fantastic. And I quote this movie like almost weekly. Like, for what I talked about renaming the files, this one was "Bread Makes You Fat." So it's just so much fun and so quotable, and just a fun light watch.
Yeah, and the soundtrack, that opening number with their band. Oh my god, I love that so much. Brie Larson has a great song in there. I think it was Black Sheep. I think that was great. Yeah. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, she played Huntress in that
Huntress, that's
movie.
right. Yeah.
And she is awesome. She's gonna be in Ahsoka. And she had a Netflix film called Kate where she was a badass. But yeah, The movie was so fun and so lighthearted and so bombastic, in your face with the over the top
Yeah.
graphics and everything. It was a fun movie. It's very quotable, and it's a good time to go back and rewatch for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yep. My next one is the only one in the MCU currently, and it's on this list, and it's Captain America and the Winter Soldier. I loved Captain America, the First Avenger. I thought it was a great film. I know a lot of people thought it was a little lackluster compared to some of the other origin Marvel films that had come out, but I really appreciated it, especially because it had the same tone as The Rocketeer. But you had that film, and then you had Avengers, and my boy Captain America wasn't getting a lot of love. Everybody kind of thought he was flat or a nerd or just didn't belong. His suit didn't really look that great in Avengers. Everybody was like, why is he getting more of the captain feel than someone like Iron Man? And when Winter Soldier came out, it destroyed anybody's perception of the character. It was incredible. And I had not read the comics as much as I read other comics, but I knew of the Winter Soldier storyline, and I wondered how it would come across in the movies. But there's a lot of people that did not know who the Winter Soldier was, and that broke a lot of people's minds. Yeah. Not to mention just the Russos coming in and taking this new, fresh take. I mean, it was like, the Dark Knight for the MCU. It was this more serious spy thriller in the MCU universe, and Robert Redford, again, somebody from The Sting that I grew up on, he was excellent in the film. It was a incredible film, and I always go back, and the score, I write to certain sections of the score all the time because it was so well done. It was a hell of a movie.
Yeah. No, this is up there for the MCU for me, but it's never reached top tier MCU for me. Like, I don't know what it is, but I think everyone loves it so much that everyone puts it up on that pedestal, and I just can't. I have to be different. So Iron Man 3 it is. Yeah. All right, my last one is Batman Forever. Obviously, Josh, you've met me.
I knew it was coming.
I have this poster hanging in my office at work. This is my introduction to Batman on the big screen. I don't know if I saw it on the big screen, but this was I had the Batmobile. I still have the Batmobile toy. Like, this came out at such a perfect time for me. I was like 4 or 5, and like, just the colors and Jim Carrey, and like, even today, like, I still love this film. It's a little bit campy, but it also still has the seriousness of the Tim Burton ones to an extent. I don't understand why you call the third movie in any franchise Forever, but beyond that, the film has its issues, but I don't care. Like, this is my happy place. So
yeah, we played the shit out of that arcade game in New York this year.
Oh man, that was insane. I forgot about that.
Got pretty far on that.
Barcade. Yep.
Mm-hmm. It was a good film. Val Kilmer, in my opinion, was a fantastic Batman. I felt so bad learning later how bad of a time he had on the set, just because of the limitations back in the day. I wish we would have got more of him. And I've always been intrigued of an extended cut release of that film, just because they had some interesting things that even Zack Snyder kind of took later. There was a scene of a giant bat, coming, and it was more in the mind of Batman. It wasn't serious, but it was something spiritual almost, and they cut that from the film. And a lot of people were like, thank God they cut that. And I was always like, what? This is the psyche. This is the complicated brain of Batman. And then for Zack Snyder to bring that, it was more of a jump scare scene, but that he did bring a giant bat that grabbed Ben Affleck in one of the, I think it was in Batman v Superman.
Yeah.
But, I liked that callback, and yeah, there's a lot of good things about Batman Forever for sure.
Yeah.
my last film is 30 Days of Night. I'm trying to think of when this film came out. 30 Days of Night came out in 2007. And again, this was a film that was based on a comic a lot of people didn't know about, but I think films like Road to Perdition kind of gave way for this. But this was a hard R horror vampires in the northern Canada kind of North Pole type situation, and
Okay.
it's this awesome. Have you ever seen this?
I have not.
So it's in northern Canada, I believe. It's in a town. The concept is there's this town that for 30 days, based on the rotation of the Earth, it's just all night, and most of the people leave the town for this period. But there's the sheriff stays in, a couple of the people that work in the town stay in, and they usually just hunker down and wait out the month. Well, this ship beaches full of vampires that choose to descend on this town because it's a month of it's all night, so they can just obliterate everybody in the town. And at first it goes swimmingly well for them, and they just seem to be taking out people left and right. But then some people like the sheriff, who's played by Josh Hartnett, don't go down so easy, and it is brutal and it's creepy, and it has this epic finale, and it was just this take on vampires that I had not seen before. It was more brutal and more animalistic. It wasn't people in suits and dressing up, and it was more animalistic, and it was just incredible. And the comic is drawn I think the artist's name is Jock, and the comic is so jarring to watch as to read as well, because it's so visceral in the artwork. And so I thought that the film really complemented the comic, and it's a hell of a watch. I highly recommend if you haven't seen it.
Okay. I've heard of it. I've never seen it, so I'll put it on the list.
It's good. Right. So that's our top 10. That's a hell of a list.
That is. Yeah. It's a hell of an episode. We're at an hour and 40. So welcome to Brilliant But Lazy. We won't be that long every week. But
we wanted to do a big debut episode, and I really wanted to highlight some non-MCU stuff, since we've been the Marvel correspondents for a long time. I wanted to show that we're not just Marvel fanboys, if you didn't realize from our backgrounds.
Yeah.
But we love other stuff too. So
yeah, and we get to hang out at New York Comic Con and talk about a lot of this stuff, but we don't really get to talk about all of it here. So I think this is going to be a great place for us to do that. So if you're into nerdy stuff, MCU, Star Wars, a little bit of DC, make sure to subscribe to our podcast feed. We will have our own feed here by the time this comes out. None of that's set up yet, or at least not sent to us. So follow Victims and Villains on social media to find out more about Brilliant But Lazy. You can also visit the Victims and Villains Patreon, where Josh and I will be doing a tie-in episode on the Patreon, exclusively talking about the very first Marvel film, Howard the Duck. That'll be dropping next week, so stay tuned for that. And
if there's other classic shows or movies you want us to go back and watch, you want us to go tackle the Lou Ferrigno Hulk or other things, we're not always, I think we're going to try to do this bi-weekly, but we're not always going to have a movie premiere or a new show to talk about. So I'd love to kind of go back and look at other things and highlight things, especially even off this list that you haven't seen, or just things we haven't seen in a while. So I think that'd be fun. So let us know what you want us to do.
Exactly. I've got the Blu-ray of the director's cut of the Ben Affleck Daredevil just sitting on my shelf, like trying to.
And that almost made my list.
Yeah, really?
The director's cut of Daredevil, I loved it so much. It's a good film.
Right, Josh, where can people find you?
They can find me out there.
Okay. Good to know.
Fiercelit.com, and then my socials are there. I'm around.
You can find me.
you?
You can find me on Instagram, acram CRAMM4815. You can also find me. All my links are there, so do that. Until next time, for Brilliant but Lazy, I'm Alan.
I'm Josh. Thanks for joining us.
And Rosie, I love this boy.